today. My name is Mechthild Rössler. I'm the director of UNESCO's World Heritage Center, and it's my pleasure to moderate this debate on culture, tourism, and COVID-19, recovery and rejuvenation. I would like to warmly welcome everyone and thank all panelists for joining us. We will start our session today with opening remarks by Mr. Ernesto Ottone, our Assistant Director General for Culture. Ernesto, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mechthild. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you all here today for this first global debate hosted by UNESCO focused on culture, tourism, and COVID-19. I would like to thank the advisory body of the 72 World Heritage Committee, the IUCN, e-commerce, and ICROM for their support in organizing this debate, as well as all our panelists and audience for taking time to join us today. Yesterday was World Tourism Day. Prior to COVID-19 crisis, tourism was a major economic sector, as you know, employing 1 in 10 people around the world. We are talking about 1.5 billion people cross international borders in 2019, providing a key source of income for many of the world's developing countries. Cultural tourism accounted for around 40% of all tourism. Yet the growth of tourism is a number of popular destinations also led to what we called over-tourism and overcrowding during peak seasons, placing pressure on World Heritage sites and negatively impacting local communities. The picture in 2020 is very, very, very different. The tourist sector has been devastated, and that's a big word, but it is what it is. The World Tourism Organization recent figures show that international tourist arrivals dropped by 65% during the first half of this year, equating to a loss of about $460 billion in export revenues. The impact on this drop in tourism is magnified among vulnerable groups and regions. Small island developing states in particular are facing a unique crisis. The disruption of travel also means a loss of important revenues for the conservation of World Heritage sites. Many intangible cultural heritage practices have been put on hold, with important consequences for the social and cultural life of communities everywhere. Those working in the performing arts and traditional craft, who largely operate in the informal sector, have been particularly hard hit. It has also negatively impacted the cultural and creative industries, threatened livelihoods, and resulted in millions of job losses. And we are still a long way from the end of this crisis and its aftermath. In response, UNESCO has convened a task force on culture and resilience on resilient tourism with the advisory body of the World Heritage Committee to address key issues on tourism and to promote a tourism that harness heritage values to rejuvenate communities, protect nature, and contribute to sustainable development futures during and beyond COVID-19 crisis. Today's debate focuses on how we can use this moment to reimagine a different kind of tourism and a different future also. How can we steer post-COVID-19 efforts towards culture and nature-based tourism that builds back better and ensures that tourists become a key pillar for heritage conservation and sustainable development for more resilient communities? Our panel of experts will share their vision for the transformation of tourism that harness heritage values and makes communities more resilient. Ladies and gentlemen, it is key that tourism and culture professionals work in partnership along with other sectors through this crisis, so that we can ensure that cultural tourism is geared towards a path of resilience and sustainability and continues to make an important contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now I will leave you, and I wish you all a fruitful discussion, and thank you very much for being with us today and for the audience for your attention. Thank you, Mechthild. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ernesto. You mentioned really the key critical points here, from over-tourism, which we experienced in the past years, to the current crisis of COVID-19. And you also mentioned that we have established a task force on culture and resilient tourism. And therefore, I would like to give now the floor to our advisory bodies. They participate in this task force. So to provide some opening remarks, and I would like to start with ICOMOS. I would like to invite Fergus T. McLaren, the president of the ICOMOS International Cultural Tourism Committee, to address us with a few words. Please, Fergus.
Thank you, MacDill. Greetings and a warm welcome from President Toshiyuki Kono and my colleagues at the International Council of Modern Society, ICOMOS. And many thanks to MacDill, Peter DeBruyne, and the World Heritage Center colleagues in coordinating this seminar in partnership with ICOMOS and our advisory bodies, ICROM and IUCN, and the distinguished panelists who are presenting and debating here on tourism recovery, resiliency, and rejuvenation. UNESCO and ICOMOS have been long-standing partners, with ICOMOS named as one of the 3 advisory bodies in the 1972 World Heritage Convention, providing scientific and professional assistance to the World Heritage Committee on cultural heritage issues. This includes assessment of the cultural and mixed properties put forward for inscription on the World Heritage List and reporting on the state of conservation of inscribed sites. As you've all come to understand, the global pandemic has significantly impacted the global tourism industry. The UNWTO projects a 60% to 80% global decline in international arrivals for 2020. This represents a decrease of 67 million tourists and 80 billion US dollars less in tourism revenues from 2019. During this time of COVID, the impacts on cultural and mixed World Heritage sites are varied and disproportionate, depending on where they are located and the accompanying government leadership and policy. On a personal level, I have witnessed this firsthand in Ottawa, Canada, the city where I was born and now live near. As the northern starting point of the 204-kilometer long Rideau Canal World Heritage Site, nominated in 2007, it has seen restrictions on all boat traffic from March until the beginning of June. Communities along the canal's route were significantly affected by the lack of traffic flow and revenue, with some lock stations closed until later in August. Boat traffic was subsequently down 50% for the summer. Financial assistance from federal and provincial bodies have softened the economic blows. With the coming winter months, amidst the second wave of the pandemic, however, when the Ottawa section turns into the world's longest outdoor skating rink at 7.8 kilometers, and probably one of the coldest skating rinks, there may be a diminished number of users due to the access to the ice, change facilities, and amenities. I should note, though, that the pandemic is not the only prevailing concern that the cultural heritage profession has to currently contend with. Responding to pressing Sustainable Development Goal targets and the increasing concerns about climate change impacts has seen ICOMOS react substantively to all 3 of these challenges through coordinated effort, all of which will be affecting tangible and intangible cultural heritage over the coming decades. My organization, the ICOMOS International Cultural Tourism Committee, has been working on a revision of the International Cultural Tourism Charter, last updated in 1999. The new draft version addresses recent circumstances and initiatives such as climate change, rights-based heritage, and the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Subsequent issues with the pandemic, natural disasters, and conflicts have necessitated creating a charter section promoting destination resiliency. Members of the ICOMOS Sustainable Goals Working Group have worked in partnership with international cultural institutions and organizations to develop the report Culture and the Implementation of the 2030 Agenda, that has a strong focus on SDG Target 11.4, heritage, driver, and enabler of sustainability. There are now also a series of webinars underway with the working group, including the upcoming one on sustainable cultural tourism on October 17th, that I will be leading. The ICOMOS Climate Change Working Group produced and released the Future of Our Past report to increase engagement of cultural heritage and climate action at the World Heritage Committee meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan, in July 2019. ICOMOS, under the leadership of our colleague Andrew Potts, was also instrumental in the founding of the Climate Heritage Network in October 2019, set up for heritage experts to contribute to future research by the world's leading authority on climate science, the International Panel on Climate Change. In closing, I would like to commend UNESCO's leadership on this first high-level event and propose a series of global regional webinars to discuss and address concerns related to COVID-19 tourism impacts of World Heritage Sites, and to outline the future of sustainable tourism initiatives in a manner that supports recovery, resiliency, and rejuvenation. We hope this continues to be a mutually beneficial partnership with the World Heritage Center, IUCN, and ICRAM moving forward. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Fergus, also for mentioning some concrete examples, such as the Rideau Canal, but also the standard setting instruments. And I hope our debate can further contribute to the Charter, because I think this is a very important document, which is a little bit outdated, as we know it's from '99.
Yes.
And now with this, I would like to turn over to Joe King. He's the Director of Partnerships and Communication at ICRAM, to take the floor. Joe, please.
Thank you, Mechtild. And thank you also to ADG Otone and the World Heritage Center, and in particular, Peter de Bruijn, for organizing this event and for the opportunity to participate in this session. Tourism can no doubt be an important benefit as part of a sustainable development policy for both cultural and natural heritage sites. If planned correctly, tourism can provide economic benefits and employment for local communities, along with an enhanced sense of pride and identity. At the same time, it can present opportunities for education and exchange amongst tourists and local communities, which can enhance mutual understanding and promote peace. But if not done correctly, tourism has a potential to cause harm to communities. This is especially true in cases where appropriate carrying capacities are not established, and over-tourism causes displacement of local communities or the diminishment of goods and services needed for everyday life. In addition, problems arise when the majority of economic benefits go to international tourism operators and hotel chains, while local communities are not able to realize significant economic benefits. Furthermore, for natural and cultural heritage sites, over-tourism can have negative consequences on the environment. The important thing that we must remember is that we need to ensure that tourism becomes a support for all three legs of the Sustainable Development Framework. There is no doubt that it brings economic benefits, but we also need to work together to ensure that it underpins the environmental and social legs of the Sustainable Development Framework, providing significant benefits to local communities and to the environment. But now we find ourselves in a very extreme situation. The COVID pandemic has created significant problems for the tourism industry and all actors documenting the closures and reopenings of World Heritage properties, giving us a good first sense of what some of those impacts might be on World Heritage. The discussion today in connection with World Tourism Day is an excellent start to what we hope will be an ongoing exchange to try to revitalize the tourism industry. At all levels are suffering from a more than 60% drop in international tourism. The heritage itself, in fact, is suffering as funds that would come from tourism to support maintenance and upkeep of sites has been hampered due to the closure of sites and the significant drop in visitors. UNESCO has done an excellent job up until such a strong hit and to bring back its benefits, but in a truly sustainable development framework. Yes, we want an economically strong tourism industry that brings benefits to stakeholders all along the value chain. But we also want to ensure that the newly revitalized tourism is planned and also brings social benefits to local communities and environmental benefits at natural and cultural heritage sites. We also want to make sure that sites, especially World Heritage properties, are well conserved as a part of this process long into the future. Now, it's clear that no good can ever come from a pandemic, and ICRAM rests in solidarity with all those who have had to fight this terrible illness or have had loved ones that have been affected. But we can use this moment to have a serious reflection on how we have done things in the past. We must not return to the normal in regard to tourism. People often talk about, well, we have to go back to normal, but we must not return to the normal. We must figure out new models for how to make tourism better and more responsive to the needs of local communities, tour operators, local and national governments, and yes, also tourists themselves. We can't forget them in this equation also. We need to keep the benefits of the tourist also in mind. ECROM, for its part, pledges to work with all of our partners in developing a new framework, and particularly in developing capacity building for heritage professionals and other stakeholders to ensure that they can devise and implement sustainable tourism strategies for their properties. I look forward to listening to the presentations today and thank the panelists and thank UNESCO also in advance for the contributions to this dialogue. And I look forward to the dialogues to come in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe, and also for mentioning the links with Sustainable Development Goals and strengthening the different legs. We have now the opportunity to do that in our reflection. So that's also an important point which we need to take on. Now it's my pleasure to invite Mizuki Morai from IUCN. She is IUCN's World Heritage Conservation Officer to take the floor. Please, Mizuki.
Thank you, Dr. Russler, and hello everyone. It's my pleasure to give a few words on behalf of IUCN at this very important event. My name is Mizuki Morai and I'm the Conservation Officer in the IUCN World Heritage Programme, an official advisory body to the World Heritage Committee on Natural World Heritage. IUCN is very pleased to be part of this initiative led by UNESCO and working with our fellow advisory bodies, ICOMOS and ICROM, to engage with the tourism industry, governments and protected area authorities to respond to these unprecedented times and generate fruitful discussions. Tourism offers huge opportunities for World Heritage sites and can contribute to conservation and development goals. From a conservation perspective, tourism can raise funds for protecting natural areas, enhance local and tourist awareness of biodiversity and conservation issues, as well as discourage unsustainable use of resources at the local level. From a development perspective, tourism revenue may reduce poverty by stimulating business development and job creation that is in principle compatible with biodiversity conservation, as well as enhancing local services, and through improved education, empower local people to advocate for the protection of the natural environment. IUCN and its expert commission, Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, produce and disseminate knowledge on tourism in protected areas, including best practice guidance. The IUCN study on the benefits of natural world heritage, published a few years ago, showed that recreation and tourism was the benefit most frequently identified at site level, being applicable to 93% of all natural world heritage sites. Non-consumptive use tourism offers the most promising avenue for many World Heritage sites to realize the aspirations of the 2015 World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy. And tourism often drives regional economies. For example, Greater Blue Mountains in Australia supports $500 million a year tourism sector that employs 5,000 people. World Heritage inscriptions in China, in some cases, quadrupled regional tourism incomes. But if poorly planned or mismanaged, tourism can have profound negative impacts on World Heritage values, conservation, and local communities. The second IUCN World Heritage Outlook report, published in 2017, found impacts from tourism to be the third most common threat to natural World Heritage sites globally. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen reports of wildlife thriving in protected areas in the absence of tourists. But in a stark comparison, we have also seen reports of increased poaching due to the absence of rangers and tourists. World Heritage sites have an authenticity that can add immeasurably to the tourism experience if sites are correctly interpreted and presented. Mass tourism experiences rarely provide the intimate personal experiences that can impact on people and change behaviors towards nature. It's important to understand how tourism demand has shifted and how we can work with the tourism industry to build these back better after this pandemic. Nature is for all, and we need to reconnect people with heritage after periods of lockdown and isolation. We look forward to mobilising our expert networks, such as through the Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, to support more meaningful and sustainable tourism use of World Heritage Sites. Thank you, and back to you, Dr. Russler.
Thank you very much, Misuki, and also for raising the important points about the links between conservation, tourism, and also the communities. And thank you also both to IUCN and to ICOMOS for making their specialist groups available to our discussion. I think it's critical to have such a network at our disposal. Now, I would like to thank the advisory bodies for the interventions and sharing with us all your work and the different responses to the COVID-19 crisis. Now it is with great pleasure that I welcome our panelists who are joining us from different corners of the world today. For our audience watching on YouTube, please don't hesitate to join the conversation online by posing your questions and comments in the chat function. We look forward to addressing your questions in the debate. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's panelists. First, Mrs. Anna Pollock, the founder of Conscious Travel as an alternative model of tourism. Mr. Suleiman Farajat, the Chief Commissioner of our Petra World Heritage Site, the Petra Archaeological Park, who has a PhD in tourism studies. Mr. Sizan Tosha, CEO of the South Africa Tourism Board with 20 years of experience in strategic partnerships. Mrs. Katrin Cheng, who is the head of the Global Corporate Social Responsibility and Community Relations at Expedia Group. And I think you have the coolest job at Expedia. So the panelists will now each share with us a short presentation. And I think we will start with Mrs. Pollock. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for welcoming, including me in this very important presentation. I'm just loading up a screen and hopefully you can see very shortly some slides. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, no problem.
Thank you. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for this opportunity and to focus specifically for inviting me. I've spent most of my career, in fact, all of my career in the tourism field as a strategist, a researcher, and I'm very much now taking advantage of my years to become more of a big picture thinker. So I'm not a specialist in any one subsector, including culture heritage, but I'm very interested in the interrelationships that we have that need to be addressed. So hopefully I'll have relevance to say and pack a lot into 7 minutes or so. So I just wanted to share my focus over the last 5, 6, 7 years really has been to look at the overarching model of tourism. And I became increasingly concerned in those years as to the viability of the model which had been so successful over the last 70 years. When I looked at it, I felt, and this is what I discussed with the European Travel Commission in 2019, that we're actually underperforming, highly vulnerable and heading towards a breakdown. It wasn't necessarily badly received, but that message wasn't necessarily received with huge amount of enthusiasm. I had no idea that COVID was around the corner. If we were talking about this last year, of course, as previous speakers have mentioned, we'd be talking about over-tourism, how quickly things can change. Now we have a different problem, and that is under-tourism. We have a tendency in tourism, I think you'll agree, to focus on one crisis at a time, and it does appear in the last 5 years that we've been bouncing from one crisis to another. At the moment, everyone is naturally and understandably preoccupied with COVID, its impact, how we're going to recover. But we have behind us, as this cartoon unfortunately very graphically depicts, a whole series of other major crises that are not going away simply because we're not necessarily focusing on them. And it is inevitable, in my humble opinion, that the COVID wiping out such an important part of a global economy, albeit temporarily, will lead to some form of significant recession, possibly a depression, and tourism is utterly dependent on disposable income, so that's an important factor. Climate change is not going away. We continue to put more carbon into the atmosphere than it can currently handle, and that is having an enormous impact on biodiversity. These are fundamental issues that we have to be facing and cannot be set aside in this need to recover economically. There's another tendency, and that is to focus very much on symptoms, which is why we tend to go from a focus on one crisis to another. I'm very interested, however, in trying to identify what is the root cause of some of these challenges. So what is happening? Well, clearly tourism is vulnerable to a number of exogenous forces. We could spend all day talking about them, and I fully recognize that each of you are fully aware of all of them. I just want to show you the patterns. But something much deeper is actually happening on this planet at this particular time in history. I believe there's every indication that we're going through another major paradigm shift in the way humans relate to the planet itself, to the earth, our relationship with nature, and our relationship with each other. It's as big a change has happened during the Enlightenment period that led to the Industrial Revolution, or even as big as the emergence of agriculture. And so right now we're literally in the middle of these two curves. One is dying, one system is dying, another one is being born, but its form is not necessarily as firm as we would like. Humanity is literally, I believe, growing up again. And for those who are interested, I wrote an article in LinkedIn and Medium recently, applying some of these changes, this understanding of deep paradigmatic change to tourism, and suggested that really what we're looking at right now is the emergence of a natural maturation of sustainability. So this is the context in which culture and heritage is working. So I won't go into too much detail, but again, to give you some kind of overarching map as to how things are developing, I'll leave you this with you. But if you can imagine that we're moving in a sense from a system which is past its peak, it's an extractive industrial production and consumption system that is essentially moving almost away from life. Nearly all of the challenges we have at the moment are life-threatening challenges. And what we have to do is completely change the way we think and the way we work together in order to reverse that trend to become what could be a truly regenerative alternative. If you see the orange line in the middle, it suggests a linear movement. Nothing is ever quite so linear as we can purvey in these diagrams. But over the last, I would argue, 20, 50 years, there has been a shift away from the dominance of a conventional business model based exclusively on returns to shareholders, to recognizing that we have in fact been creating damage, that we need to do less harm, which is the emergence of a sustainability emphasis. And very, very recently, a recognition that we can in fact become restorative, that we need now to repair some damage that we've already created. I would argue that this is where we're sitting in history at the moment. Then there is this sort of orange block, which was supposed to designate some kind of a chasm, if you like, because in order for us to move forward into a new way of being and seeing on this planet, we actually have to change the very patterns of our thinking, the way we see ourselves, to have a mindset shift. And unless we do that, we'll always be pulled back into this somewhat extractive mentality. So that is, I hope, a helpful sort of picture. It's not entirely of my making. I've adapted it from some of the best thinkers in regeneration. So very quickly at the end, I just want to quickly suggest, what does regeneration involve? Well, first of all, it involves that we change the way we see the world, have to put it on different lenses. We have to think differently. And that's exactly what Einstein said was absolutely essential if we wanted to address all the challenges we're facing right now. So there are 6 implications of this, which I'll race through very quickly and we can discuss further in the discussion. First of all, we have to see ourselves differently and have a change of identity. We humans are part of a living, self-organizing network system. It's not a machine. We're not separate from anyone else or separate from nature. We do not live in these nice little boxes that we love to use in our organizational diagrams. We're a messy, fuzzy, networked system. The implication of that is you can't direct it. You have to work with the system. Change comes from within. The second implication is every one of those diagrams here, go back to the circles, and with very porous membranes, are fully interconnected and interdependent. This idea that we're separate from nature, nature's an it, it's out there, we can fix it, it's a problem, etc., is totally erroneous. As we all know, we're part of it and nature is a part of us. The silos we've created are illusions. And in preparing for this, I came across some work you're doing to link the nature culture community, which I think is so important. So a heritage site is obviously existing within a context of its community, which is again existing within the context of its culture and its natural world. There's a tourism industry that it relies on for its visitors. That depends on an economy, and that depends on the health of the planet. Third implication, well, the issue really right now, as COVID has undoubtedly taught us, is ultimately about our health. You cannot have a healthy business, you cannot have a healthy enterprise, an individual cannot be healthy unless the environment, the society, the culture is also healthy. It's also, I believe, COVID has taught us about limits. Everyone, and perhaps particularly in IUCCN, would be familiar with carrying capacity, but a lot of people have not really understood that until COVID came along and we were taught to flatten the curve. We had to respect that the hospitals, we had limited capacity to deal with the sick, so that we had to try and reduce that curve to flatten it in this way. That's carrying capacity. Now we can use that example when we're trying to explain that a World Heritage Site can only handle so many people in a day. Fourth implication, it's going to change fundamentally our purpose. The purpose of tourism right now has been to deliver to GDP through having more people each year than last year spending more money. In the natural world, however, and we are part of that, the purpose shifts to survival and from survival to thrival. Nothing in nature grows bigger forever. It's about optimizing net benefit. The fifth implication is that of role. We now must shift from being extractors of wealth and dominators of nature to becoming caring stewards. And the sixth one is an important one, I think, for tourism particularly, and that's to ask not what can everyone do for tourism, or even what can we do for culture and heritage and our sites, but how can we contribute the health, well-being, and happiness of humanity. So it's a very big picture view of what the context is for your deliberations. I closed with this lovely Hawaiian saying, Malama Hanoa, because I understand that's when you, as an organizations, came together around nature and culture. That's exactly what we need to do. We need to be caring for the Mother Earth. I hope this was helpful, and thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, this was when we all met in Hawaii in 2016 and made this statement together, which is very relevant today. And thank you also for showing us where is the paradigm shift happening right now. That's really a good picture for our debate today. With this, I would like to turn over to Jordan to see our Chief Commissioner at the Petra World Heritage Site. Suleiman, you have the floor, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really pleased to join you in this important debate today. Unfortunately, in a very, I would say, difficult times and depressive mood all over the world. And we are in Petra as part of the World Heritage family have been going through really turbulent and very tough time. we had last year, I would say, the peak in tourism in Petra and in Jordan in general, where Petra received over 1 million tourists. And as Anna mentioned, the discussion was last year about carrying capacity and how can we size the number of tourists and all these things. And suddenly the COVID-19 happened, and we are now struggling of securing jobs, and the economy is really suffering very much. We stopped receiving tourists in Petra in March. And since then, a general focus from the government was, there was I would say, a way in order to undermine the loss to focus on domestic tourism. But domestic tourism is different from one country to another. I mean, regional and domestic tourism in Europe would work because the economies are similar, people travel in their own region. But in a country like Jordan, where we heavily relied on international tourism, domestic tourism, of course, solved part of the problem, but it did not solve the whole problem. In my point of view, there will be no regional or national solution for tourism, because tourism is a global industry, as you may know. There will be possibly a local recipe in terms of what type of tourism we want to allow in the future, and etc. But tourism is an international phenomenon, as you all know. So there won't be a regional solution, it has to be a global one. And this is why when it comes to UNESCO World Heritage Sites, I think that UNESCO, the World Heritage Center, and the other advisory bodies, they have also a role to take in the near future in trying to unify the way different countries react, and different countries may recover in the near future. I know that challenges are different from one area to another. Just from my own observation as Chief Commissioner of the Petra Authority, but also as a local of Petra in Jordan, last year, the level of interest in Petra as a site was immense. Everyone was calling, everyone was interested, because tourism was here. Everyone wanted to give us an advice of how to better manage the capacity of the site. Everyone wanted to make a project. Everyone was there. And now where COVID-19, where the situation is really not really well, I have the feeling everyone is busy with his or her own problems, so no one is asking. So this is a time where, as Anna said, it's also time of how we relate to each other. How do we also feel with each other? Of course, on a macro level, we are making use of the whole crisis to work on the infrastructure that we couldn't do in the time of tourism, especially restoration within the site, reorganizing the tourism flows, doing restoration of new trails, trying also to eliminate certain, I would say, negative vendors and illegal vendors, and putting them in a legal way, trying to plan with the hope that tourism will come back. An interesting point that although over 80% of locals rely heavily on tourism, and thousands of people lost your jobs, shops are closed, there is an investment a little bit in certain fields, especially in the hotel sector, where people started, because in 2019 the numbers increased, so some of them are continuing their projects. I think there will be a focus, especially in the region, on quality tourists over quantity tourists. You know that because of the different forms of low-cost carriers whatsoever, I used to talk in a simple level to people working in tourism that they were all complaining last year, okay, we have so many tourists, but it's not the good quality of tourists as we had like 10, 15 years ago. So possibly the COVID-19 will be an opportunity also to bring us back to a kind of quality tourists in the future, because we all agree that travel will be more expensive in the future. There will be less people traveling. We also have trying to present word to the world through technology, through having virtual tours. The Petra Museum managed to be part of a global network for showcasing Petra. We also developed a virtual tour, and we are now working with private schools all over the world. There is a project with a company to develop guided tours in Petra to be broadcasted for students all over the world. I think, and I argue because my question is about strategies for the future, I think no country whatsoever has the right recipe or can really tell you what are the approaches for the future, because the problem is that certain countries rely heavily on tourism or fully on tourism. Certain countries, tourism plays a role, but not, they have other economies working. And this is when it comes in a micro level for us in the economy of Petra, where we up to 90% rely on tourism. We are now thinking as a local government of finding new ways. But it's also complicated because one of the options that could be agriculture, but we also lack water in the region. And the problem is, and this is not new, this is old, that when tourism would come back, people go back to tourism because it's easy to make money quickly than working in the field for a long time. Talking with some of the entrepreneurs in the region of Petra, some of them have started looking for other businesses, not only through tourism, but the chain of tourism still is the strongest one. Of course, the measurement the government in Jordan did at the beginning were very much into the safety of the people. There was a curve for a longer period of time. Numbers of people infected still below many other countries, but the real side effects it's in the economy. And I'm not talking about tourism only, but also other economies. We think in the future that the area, what we call it in Jordan, the Golden Triangle, which is Aqaba, Wadi Rum, and Petra, would be an area which quickly, possibly, might attract international tourists if tourism recovers. Especially this is type of tourism. It's an open area tourism. It's a landscape that's open and could attract in the future. But some of the files that we have been working in as a World Heritage Site, including management plans, including carrying capacity, including the right development of tourism, will continue. And I think that COVID-19 is giving us a little bit of time to better manage certain files. And time is running, because when things started in March, we were in a hurry to do certain old files and to solve problems, but time flies quickly and you have the feeling you cannot really solve them quickly because you get other challenges, especially when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to the whole economy that's now suffering. And the funny thing is that in Petra, the community used always to say, not many people are profiting from tourism. And they were complaining that they didn't have share of tourism last year. And suddenly after COVID-19 happened, everyone is claiming that I used to profit from tourism. We want tourism back. So this is maybe a way that people start in the future to appreciate tourism in a better way and to appreciate the way they deal with tourists, because I don't think that over-tourism was the right solution, but also absence of tourism is completely an issue. We also try to work on the infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I'm not talking about the World Heritage Site itself, but beyond the buffer zone in the region around, and also to make more urbanization beyond the area. Of course, there is this struggle between tourism as a public sector and tourism as the private sector. And the private sector is really, sorry, but the private sector, this is my little girl joining me. So the private sector is really having a tough time in the country. And the public sector cannot really do that much because the whole economy is really doing bad. In my point of view, I think that we have to react in a global level. We have to have regional alliances, how to deal with tourism. And we have to be ready for, I would say, a slow recovery. I mean, you know, when the story started, we said maybe end of the year, really, but all indications are here that it will take time. It will take time. We are, as a World Heritage Site, committed, of course, to do more work within the site. And we hope to have the resources, the right resources for that, because, you know, tourism, of course, it was in one hand a threat to the site, but also it brought us the economic values that we could do restoration, we could employ people, but now this is not the case. So I think that this is very important to have a collective way of dealing with things. We are open for any parties, for any organization interested to work with us in Petra and in Jordan as a whole. We hope it will not last that long, because if things continue longer, even people will feel like they let alone, and it might also lead to more problems in the future. I think that having such a dialogue today is very important. We are, I mean, myself, I'm always optimistic, but to be honest, the situation is not that easy. We hope that there will be a vaccination soon and things will recover. But I'm also sure that tourism will not recover in a fast way. It will take time, and it will also force us to look for, as I told you, a responsible type of tourism in the near future. I wanted at the beginning to present numbers of how really in Petra the situation is, but I can tell you that it is almost zero international tourists coming to the country. Again, I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank Peter for inviting me. And I prefer to have this kind of maybe informal presentation, because theories are really good, but in the reality, maybe to express the feelings of locals, how tourism is impacting their life, is more than important. And I'm happy to listen to the other presentations. Possibly there's some advice that we also could apply in Petra. And back to you, Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Suleiman. I think this was important to share also your experience as a local and as the commissioner of Petra. The idea is also of our panel that we share these experiences, especially for sites which are all World Heritage places, and to see are there any models which could be interesting to be analyzed for your situation. The point you also made about agriculture, because people are suffering in and around the sites, is an important one. And this could be potentially used later on for specific products for high quality tourists, because they are also interested in the cuisine. Now, with this, I would like to thank you, and I would like to turn over to Cesar, who will share with us some experience from the perspective of the South African Tourism Board. Cesar, please. I just saw you. Maybe you should switch on your microphone and video. Maybe you clicked on the wrong button to switch on your microphone. With this, I would then, if Caesar switched on the wrong button, I will then turn to Catherine in the meantime. Mrs. Catherine Cheng, who is our private sector representative today from Expedia. So Catherine, please take the floor, and you will be then afterwards followed by Caesar. Catherine, please.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen really quickly here. Oh, I think Caesar's back. Do you want to go? Okay. So today, I thank you so much for including me in this panel. I think this is such an important topic. Obviously, as a travel company, a global travel company, we have also been hurt very badly with the lack of tourism that's happening around the world. So I'm going to discuss pre-COVID what our sustainable travel pillars were, and then look at what we think moving forward will have to change or stay the same course on. So obviously, as a global travel company, we have encouraged people to go around the world and really open their eyes to different cultures, different locations. We believe that it really opens minds to travel the world. And with that, ability to provide the tools for people to travel to any location around the world comes a great responsibility. So what we did was we had these pillars of sustainable travel that we had come up with before this has been going for a couple of years now. And what we did was we focused on these 4 pillars because we felt like these were the very key areas for travel. So if you look at environmental conservation, obviously we know what has happened with travel. Travel is a great thing, but it also puts great pressures on our environment. And so what we tried to do was look at supporting environmental initiatives such as tree planting, beach cleanups, single-use plastic bans, things that were pretty tangible, but also long-term and had long-term effects and also really impact tourist destinations. We also look at promoting green hotels and sustainable travel tips to provide information for travelers. Providing options for customers to offset their travel footprint during the travel purchasing process, again, giving them tools, and also education about damaging effects to different parts of the world. Things like sunscreens that are dangerous to an ocean environment, or different types of impacts around for different destinations. We also had a focus on disaster recovery. Obviously, before the pandemic, we didn't realize that pandemics would be part of this. We were really looking at natural disasters such as hurricanes and floods and different climate sort of impacts. But in doing disaster recovery, we really felt that helping communities to rebuild their critical locations, such as healthcare centers and schools, were just as important as looking at the environmental piece. So we supported resiliency efforts to prepare for future disasters, including solar panels for different locations, clean water resources, and local farming. Also promoting travel to affected destinations through marketing support and engagement with local tourist boards after the disasters so that the tourism could come back. The economic and community development front, we were looking at promoting local and eco-friendly tour operators and local vendors for historic, cultural, and culinary tours, encouraging people to buy and source food and services locally, and invest in local businesses so that you can keep the sustainability of the economy, not only of the destinations. And then responsible tourism, providing information to help travelers be more culturally sensitive and respectful when traveling, give insight into best times to visit popular destinations to ease overcrowding. So whether it's time of day, time of year, depending on the ability for tourists to be able to manage that. And then alternate locations to visit that tourists may not know about, so that you are promoting smaller destinations or lesser known places so that you can try and ease the pressures on the most popular places. So obviously post-COVID has shifted some of these priorities. So we still have the same travel pillars and they're all very important still. I would say that that COVID has just as other speakers have mentioned, it's given us an opportunity to sort of reset, reboot, and really look at how do we quote unquote come back to travel. Obviously, we will never come back to travel the way that we were, but it's how do we come back in a smarter, more targeted, strategic way so that it's more sustainable, truly more sustainable. So I think that that we all recognize that this is going to be the reality for us. It's going to be a slow comeback, and what we don't want is that once we have a vaccine, that all of a sudden there's a big push back to all these destinations, and we haven't been prepared for this opportunity. So taking advantage of the opportunity on the environmental front, obviously for our priorities, we believe that nothing changes there except for that we try to make sure we continue this. I know that a lot of, for travel, at least for our company, these things cost money. This was obviously an investment. And so when travel has been hurt so hard, it is difficult to look at investing in these areas, but it's really important to make sure that we are taking advantage of this lull so that we can put in place practices and change things as much as possible, so that when travel starts when travel starts again, that we are prepared. In disaster recovery, I mean, this again, adding the pandemic as a disaster, this is something that we really believe that just because we have the COVID-19 pandemic didn't mean that it stopped all the other disasters that have happened, that do happen around the world. Unfortunately, it just piles on. And then of course we have other things that layer on top of that, because we also have the economy and joblessness and lots of different things like that. So of course the pressures are going to be even more stark, I believe. So making sure that the communities are resilient and they are supported is really, truly important. And I think that's where economic and community development comes in. So again, before the pandemic, focusing on local was a very key point for us. I think that looking at how to sustain a destination really means sustaining it from all levels. Now it's more important, obviously, to look at the local. I love hearing about other ways that we can make community sustainable, because before the pandemic, we were looking at things like at tour operators and really encouraging local people to understand what it means to sustain destinations, to be responsible about the destinations, and come up with businesses that would support that while also supporting the needs of tourism. Because ultimately, I think we've gone from a place where tourism used to be about going and learning about cultures, and more to sort of dropping into a destination and getting a selfie and posting it on social media. And I think this is again an opportunity to go back to looking at how do we actually encourage people to really immerse themselves in the local communities, and in doing so, promotion of local buying, local sourcing, really getting to know the local community. And then again, with that leads into the responsible travel piece. So again, with travel of responsibility, we believe that our role is to provide as much information and education for tourists and travelers to be able to make the best decisions for them. We certainly wouldn't want to guilt people into doing things and make it so that it's not a good experience, but we also want to make sure that we're providing all the information possible for them to make those decisions, whether it's on bringing a reusable water bottle or being respectful of a destination. But I think more importantly now, the responsibility that comes with travel is that much more important, just because of all of the pressures that will come. So those who can afford to go back to travel, the ability to be patient, the ability to really understand what the pressures were that were put onto all these travel destinations, and not expect certain things that they've always come to expect, but also look at how we can all be a part of the solution to provide sustainability throughout the travel sphere. And then real quickly, I'm going to talk about something that we've partnered with UNESCO on in the last couple of years. We put together a sustainable travel pledge because we knew that all the things that I just talked about weren't enough to just say. We actually needed to have a partnership, and UNESCO was our perfect partner for this, to be able to provide the information, the inspiration, and the expertise. So we have a sustainable travel pledge that we launched last year, and we used Thailand as the test market because we had a partnership with the Tourism Authority of Thailand, where the government was willing and was looking at a way to really promote sustainability for the region. And this is a model where we're trying to get hotels and tour operators to really commit to doing even the bare minimum. We believe that trying to get all the players in the tourism sphere to commit to sustainability is a very difficult thing, and there are a lot of bodies out there that might certify, might provide green badging, things like that. But what that does, though, a lot of times is it prevents smaller operators from participating, and we really need smaller operators to be able to be in the game with us, whether it's on environmental issues or local sourcing or any of these areas. So we put together this pledge with UNESCO. So we have a baseline that these operators can say, yes, we are willing to do at least one thing to change our way of doing things, and we believe that when you do one thing, you start to learn and you start to see how easily you can start incorporating other things to have that sustainability mindset. So this partnership that we have is something that we're starting to push to other regions around the world, and we believe that having this in place really gives again a baseline for organizations to participate and look at how they can be more sustainable. I'm going to end here and look forward to hearing the rest of this debate and being part of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think you made this very important link between the tourism industry and the local communities, and also for providing us with the example from Thailand. I think it is a very good example to share also with the environmental consideration. Now I see that Cesar is online. Cesar, please, it's now your turn to give us the perspective of the South African Tourism Board, please.
Thank you very much, and apologies for that. From a beautiful spring day down in Johannesburg, South Africa. So sometimes I feel like I'm a villain here, listening to all the people speak before me. But essentially our job is to drive many people as possible to visit our destination. I think the key thing, just to kind of set the context, especially from an Africa perspective, is that, we've made economic policy decisions to essentially move away from extractive mineral resources type of mining in that space, whether it's oil, gas, and then etc., to move towards more the services arena. And tourism is part and parcel of that drive. I think Anna shared with us basically in terms of how the numbers have been increasing over the last period. So if you look at 2019, 1.5 billion international trips, just to kind of give you a sense then that Africa has only got a 5% market share of that. That's 54 countries with about a population of almost 1 billion. So therefore, the way we looked at tourism is literally with a lot of headroom to really kind of drive, from that activity there. Now, the issues around COVID obviously hit us like it hit everyone else. And we earlier on made some decisions then in terms of what does recovery look like? And we're very clear that recovery is not restoration to ways of old, that we actually have to look and recalibrate in terms of how we stack things up, because COVID gave us that opportunity. And typically in South Africa, as an example, what we saw is that we were too reliant on international travel. So therefore, if you look at our base, very weak from a domestic sector, but very strong, international one. We wanted to kind of reset that. And our recovery was led inside out, starting with domestic, then regional, then ultimately international. To give you a bit of a sense then in terms of some of the successes that we've seen, is that part of looking at domestic, we're very clear that inclusion needs to lie at the center of this. whilst on probably just a pure quantitative side, our issues were not more on domestic, on over tourism, but rather concentration, at certain times of the year. So if you look at the popular destinations, whether you look at the likes of the Cape Town as an example, or the Kruger National Park, we found that, through certain times of the year, there just was too much concentration. Now, part of the view to say, how do you spread this right across the country? We've got a wide-based country, but then shining the spotlight on secondary cities. And again, some of the successes then on the COVID now as we're coming out of it is literally, as the UNWTO theme this year, which is actually rural tourism, is shining the spotlight on those hidden gems. We've seen such a big surge of people wanting to go out into the rural side, the far-flung villages, etc., because social distancing comes as a natural kind of characteristics of that place. So, and what it does then, the economic benefit that it has on those outliers over there really brings a lot of momentum into the sector. We are also worried that at some time is that those that are outside, excluded, if I can call it that, when they looked at the sector, they've kind of also linked that maybe part of the problem that, of COVID being imported into the country was through tourism. So tourism started getting this, kind of perception across the country that, it is the ill that is actually bringing us, as I say, importing in the virus in. But through inclusion, then people start to see some economic benefit over there. The other thing as well is how we profile countries and really bringing culture to the fore, bring people to the fore. That South Africa is not just about animals, as an example. Yeah, it's a big facet of it. To give a bit of a sense, the Kruger National Park, which is our biggest park, is the size of Belgium, as an example. That's our zoo, to kind of give you that perspective. But just to show that we are more than just animals, that we can add more. And that gives a lot of depth in terms of the quality of visitors that come, the quality of the interaction that is there as well. Then lastly, just to sum up, we've also had some external shocks, before COVID. It's kind of been a ramp up to kind of where we're at. First, we had Ebola, which was isolated to West Africa, as it were. But the world decided that all of Africa has got Ebola, and essentially we saw our international numbers, come down. So we had to give the world a geography lesson, right? And yeah, that's a story for another day. And then the other one was around climate, essentially. Cape Town, one of our iconic destinations in 2018, had the whole scare around drought, day zero, as it were. And I'm sure you all saw the imageries of, the Cape Town running out of water and essentially being one of the first major cities in the world that are going to run out of water. To kind of give you a sense right now is all of the dams are 100% full as of yesterday, right? The trick there was essentially not to look at where we get more water sources, but rather changing the consumer behavior. And what we saw, the behavior of citizens really, really dropped down using much less water. And similarly, part of the focus, in our view, in terms of making sure we get sustainability right, not just so much focus on the product itself or the delivery of it, but to inform and educate consumers, because they have the power. They have the power to decide where to go, when to go, and how to go over there. As a young boy growing up, I used to go to the circus. And at that time, when you went to the circus, there were live animals that literally did tricks and everything else. Until we were informed and educated the backstory of those animals and everything else there, we stopped going. Guess what? Circuses don't have live animals anymore because the consumer has been educated and informed. And I know I'm kind of emphasizing this, but we have to be cognizant in the recovery of the sector that the consumer behavior is changing at a rapidly paces. Every single day, there are new data points all the time that we're all receiving that informs our views, right? Where literally we're seeing probably the older, wealthier generation is probably not traveling because they're the ones at risk, as it were. You're going to get younger ones and family ones and everything else there. So how then do we as this nation change around and fit basically these changing environments? Then lastly, technology is going to be a huge enabler for this. An enabler in the sense that it brings about the ability for the small, invisible, to literally to be visible on global platforms through technology. at the same time, it puts the power in the hands of the consumer, to know, as an example, what time of day to visit sites, as an example, what the other options are in terms of geographic spread and everything else from that perspective. So all of this coming together really drives at the heart of it that when we recover, as we're recovering, it's not return to ways of old, but to rather use this as an opportunity to actually lay new foundation and a new trajectory, essentially for South Africa as well, and also in the greater context of the world. We are opening our borders up on the 1st of October internationally. I'm not expecting a flurry of people to come through, but I think it is more of a statement that we're making that we are ready and able basically to engage with the world. There are conditions, and I think now we're going through that risk framework as to, you know, classifying countries into red, amber, or green, essentially, which is probably not so ideal, but I think the world, all of us, are trying to figure out what's the best way of actually coming back in again, you know, in terms of the tourism activity. And then lastly, I think we were all, you know, kind of enthralled with global images of where we're in the midst of the lockdown. We just saw clear open skies. We saw just the benefit. The world was like breathing, wasn't it? Its lungs were opening up. And, you know, in our instance, the Kruger National Park, we saw the animals, just literally, I think as Mizuga stated, they were literally taking over the park. There's a famous golf course which are like playing there from time to time, but they were the greenkeepers, you know, at that time, and really opening up into that space. And I think what the thinking was then, do we chase them away? That's their natural habitat, right? The golf course is an artificial kind of injection in there. And again, we're still trying to find ways of coexisting within there, where the old paths are no longer there. We have to chart new ones and find that equilibrium. Bringing people to the fore, culture, engagement, authenticity is going to be the key driver. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cesar. And I really liked what you said about inclusion and also the quality of the interaction with the communities. We are all looking forward to coming back to Kruger or maybe to Drakensberg, where you developed already a wonderful program with the communities who are cooking for the tourists to come. So I think this was really a very good presentation by all of us, each one of you, which highlighted also, I think, the enormity of the challenges we are facing in this crisis, but also the time we have now to build back tourism in a way that it's more resilient and responsible and sustainable. Now, I want to share with you that we are getting questions through the chat at the moment, and some of you have already addressed some of these questions. For example, how can we reimagine post-COVID tourism that addresses the challenges of climate change? That's something Cesar just referred to with the example from South Africa. But before we go to those questions, I have a quick one, 1 minute each. Anna, I would like to ask you, the global disruption to travel caused by COVID-19 has created time to reflect and reimagine new economic and social models for culture and nature-based tourism. What are the most important challenges that will need to take place within the heritage and tourism sectors to achieve regenerative tourism? I know it's difficult, but please.
In 1 minute, no worries. Okay, I think there are 3 core things. One, all tourism, whether it's heritage culture or what, has to really focus now on net benefit to the local community. And that has not been a consideration. We've looked at gross numbers, but not costs. The costs often get borne by the community. Secondly, if we really want to develop resilience, and increase value, we have to educate and develop local communities so that they are able and willing and happy to share their community, their culture. I'm picking up Cesar's point about authenticity. Quickly, culture I suggest you look at culture in the broadest sense. So again, each place is distinct. It has its own culture. What can we be doing to make sure that we're not falling into copycatism and things like that? And then the other one, which is really important, is it goes back, it's not theory, it's this holistic perspective, not looking distinctly at culture separate from anything else. So maybe as follow an example in Crete, where they're combining archaeology, agroecology, farming, culinary skills, all as an experience of what Crete authentically is. The more we can do of that, the more net benefit we'll create, the more net benefit, the more resilient we'll become. Thank you.
Excellent. You gave us some ideas to look further. Now I'm turning to Suleiman. You know that the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the vulnerability of our cultural and natural heritage. You spoke about it already for Petra, and that relies on these tourisms for survival and the need to strengthen networks, policies, and systems to protect the communities. As this situation evolves, which approaches do you think to the crisis have been the most effective to date, and why? In 1 minute. Sorry, your microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. As said earlier, the approaches varied from one area to another, where especially in the European market, the regional tourism, domestic tourism maybe has been okay or successful. In other countries, especially that rely on international tourism, this is not the case. I think a very good approach is the diversification of the economy. This is not necessarily a way that how tourism would recover, but also how to have other sectors supportive to tourism in the future in different destinations. We need to find other ways rather than just relying on tourism, and having other supportive economies as well. And in the future, there will be, as I told earlier, quality rather than quantity tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn to Cesar. How can a new, healthier relationship between tourism and heritage sites be sustained going forward? And how can we share and scale up the most innovative approaches to low impact tourism in World Heritage sites in a country such as in a country like South Africa?
Thank you. Yeah, I think as I said earlier on, it's about how we profile and tell our stories. We tell our stories through the people, through the heritage sites. Heritage sites is all about history as well, and making sure that that is aligned, in terms of the consistency of the messaging. Inclusion becomes key. When people are excluded, they destroy. When they're included, they protect. And I think as now we come back in again, let's bring people in so that the benefits of tourism trickle right across the board, but it's got a very long value chain as opposed to very few, kind of narrow from the perspective there. So heritage is owned by the people, for the people, and I think tourism really needs to kind of, as we come back out again, to include everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We just got a question in from the chat, and it's a turn of Mrs. Cheng, and I'm sure she can do that in 1 minute. Everybody wants quality tourism and those who stay longer and spend more, but is this realistic? Is there still a place for package and group tourism?
Yeah, I believe that, based on what Cesar just said, I think that the narratives and the stories, I think that's what draws people. So I do think that there's a place for both. I think that there's no way that going back to travel, people are not going to want to do the, they want to maximize their travel, right? You're spending a lot of money to travel. So of course you want to see a lot of destinations. But I think what we're saying is that if you do travel, take a look at the benefit, like what you're trying to get out of it. I think the quality over quantity, that type of thing, or the type of traveler that you want to be, the type of experience that you want to have. And I think that it's our job as tour operators, as promoters of travel, to provide those stories, to work with the local communities, to see what they want to tell, the stories that they want to tell, and if they want to tell these stories, how can they provide the services and the different opportunities that will make people want to stay longer. So it's a combination of working together and providing the narratives.
Excellent. Many thanks. Now there are two questions we got from the chat. How can we use this as an opportunity to promote local appreciation of culture and developing local tourism? And the other one from the chat, which is linked to it, how can we make our heritage both a source of community ownership and a tourist destination? Anybody who wishes to answer that one? Anna, what about you?
Well, it matches in a way what I was saying, and it picks up Caesar's point. We've not been inclusive enough in tourism. We've treated it as a separate industry. It's utterly embedded in the community. What we're inviting people to come into our homes to experience who we are as a place, who we are as a people. And if we do not include...
Sorry, your microphone, please.
Sorry, I thought it was unmuted. Okay, this picks up the point that was made earlier by Caesar about inclusion. Tourism is about inviting people into your home, about inviting the people into your home place, your area of residence. And if that's done properly, then it is naturally inclusive. But the industrial model treated it very much as a transactional business, and it was imposed in many cases on communities. So I don't think we've even begun to tap the richness that exists within the community in terms of knowledge about its history, its culture, its way of life, and a natural desire of people to want to share that. So I think one of the best places to start right now is engaging people and understanding where they're living and asking them, tell us your stories, and get people involved, sitting around the campfire, sharing experiences. One whole group of people that we often neglect are sitting in care homes right now, feeling terribly isolated and underappreciated. And yet they have phenomenal histories that could be shared at the moment or should be shared in the future. So its inclusion is vital. I think that says it all.
Thank you very much, Anna. And as I said, there is also a question on the challenges of climate change. And I would like to tell our audience that we have already produced a book, which is called Tourism and Climate World Heritage and Tourism in a Changing Climate, which you find on our webpage with a number of case studies. But I think we need to work, all of us, better together on how we can address climate change, which means educated tourists, also learning from case studies from different parts of the world and looking what communities have done on the ground, because they have the traditional knowledge on dealing with climate change actually over centuries. And this knowledge is based very much in elements of the intangible heritage also. So there's a link between World Heritage and the Intangible Heritage Convention. I think we have another question. I'm not sure to whom to give this. How do you conceive global strategies that transcend the economic dimension of tourism and are respectful to the SDGs and local communities? I'm looking at Fergus, maybe. No, Fergus, or maybe Joe King or Misuki? Fergus, what about you?
Nope, I'm still here, so you got me, Mechtil. Thank you. I think that there are a number of global conventions out there, and especially in the case of the SDGs, you have 3 of the targets that are dedicated to tourism, which are 8.9, 12B, and 14.7. You also have cultural heritage. And, there are a number of efforts that are being made in that regard, but I think that there needs to be, it's one thing to have it global. It's another thing to really try and make it work on a day-to-day basis. And for tourism operators and industries to understand the importance of taking this approach with the SDGs in order to ensure that, it can actually function over the next 10 years to improve sustainability. And more importantly, as many of the speakers have intoned, really focused on the community-driven benefits that can come from it. And as Mechtil, as you said, really working together as well on climate change, because all of these, whether we like it or not, are interrelated. And there needs to be a really solid thinking in terms of, if we're driving tourism, if we're talking about rejuvenation, renewal, and resiliency, there has to be a strong sort of emphasis also on how it's going to impact the climate, and also on the sustainability of that for those communities, and how you define that community, whether it's local, regional, national, or continental in some cases. So I think that's a really important way to look at those conventions and how they can be applied.
Thank you very much. And I also think that the networks you have can help us. I think that ICROM did a lot of webinars, ICOMOS did webinars. I think we need to consolidate also some experiences from exchanges we have at the moment across the world. Now we are reaching here the end, and I would like to thank all the panelists very much for sharing their valuable time with us. And I would like to thank all the people watching us, and also the very interesting questions we got over the chat. Believe me, we will look into these questions and continue the discussions in our international task force. And I think the debate really demonstrated the importance of heritage and tourism stakeholders coming together as we face this ongoing crisis also together. The impact of COVID-19 has provided us with really a watershed moment to rethink and transform existing tourism models towards a tourism that is more resilient, inclusive, and resource efficient. Some of you mentioned that. We must take this opportunity to be forward-looking and forward-thinking in our approach, and we cannot afford to return to mass tourism, to over-tourism models that place our valuable natural and cultural heritage assets at risk. Now, we face the reality of global challenges like the climate change and its impact, serious impacts on tourism as well. There is simply too much at stake. UNESCO is committed to work with all partners, including also UNWTO, and through our networks to ensure that tourism builds back better. And this crisis is a moment in time to better reflect for the future and for sharing the ideas among the different stakeholders. I would like to thank our audience very much for your attention, and I look forward to inviting you to future debates on these issues. We will certainly let you know if it's safe. I have one request coming in. Please turn on your videos because they would like to make a nice group photo. So please give me a wonderful smile while I am closing this session. And if it's safe to do so, please go out and support our local heritage sites and our creative industries. If not, please enjoy armchair travel through our extensive web pages from all our partners. Watch the videos from our World Heritage Site Managers and look at the World Heritage Review and wonderful travel magazines from all over the world. Use the time to get acquainted with our heritage sites and different cultures. Many thanks to all of you and have a nice afternoon. Okay, is the photo taken? Nobody gives me a sign, so I think it is. Okay, thank you very much and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
The recording has stopped.